So we're going to start out with go ahead and dig our hole. So when I'm planting my native plants, I really like to rinse off the potting medium and plant them direct in the soil. So start out with a high pressure hose, start rinsing off excess potting medium. And sometimes I will completely rinse the roots off. This one's a bit tangled, and so the idea here is to get all this potting medium out of the root zone so that as it breaks down it doesn't become hydrophobic. Potentially it doesn't create a mass of humus that holds tons of moisture and causes root rot over time, but also it's not this nutrient dense zone that's loaded with fertilizer from the nursery, as well as you'll see the little beads of time release fertilizer that the grower added to push and expedite growth so that these plants are sellable faster. But all that nutrition in here will stimulate the roots to grow within that concentric circular sort of area. So rinsing that off makes the plant reach out for nutrition more. Special shout out to Jennifer Hopton Villalobos, who taught me about this, and I finally got brave enough to experiment with it last year, and my results have been phenomenal. So we want to make sure that this root zone is growing out instead of into a knotted up tangle that will ultimately choke itself out as those roots mature and get bigger and strangle each other. So I think we're ready to put this in the ground now. So now as I'm planting, I make sure my root zone isn't touching the bottom of my hole. I'm going to start lightly adding some of the soil back in to bury the bottom, and then I'm going to take a high pressure hose and I'm going to blast that sand to get the air pockets out and ensure greater contact with the root system for the long-term health of the plant. This is also going to make it quite sturdy too, getting all those air pockets out of there. And again, high pressure water is your friend and ally in this specific part of the project. So I'm gonna fill it about a third of the way with dirt the first time, about a third the second time, and each time I'm gonna stop and hit that with some pressurized water. Get all the air pockets out. We don't want any air pockets in the root zone. That'll invite pestilence and critters to invade the root zone and attack the plant. So I'm also making sure that I'm planting just slightly above the grade. You never want to plant too deep. So 1 to 2 inches above the grade, 2 inches if you're going to mulch real heavily, which I do intend to do. I don't plant quite as high when I do this root disturbance because there's not as much settling as there would be if I just, sort of tilled and loosened the soil and then didn't pack it real well back in as I planted the plant to leave the root zone nice and aerated and fluffy. for plants to, you know, colonize that with new roots. So what we've got here now is a muddy pile of mess. I'm going to go ahead and mulch that. Now this particular soil, because it gets half day shade in this zone, stays quite moist, so there's no hydrophobia to be concerned about here. If there was hydrophobic soil, or this were a drier condition, I would build little moats of dirt around the plant root zone to contain and hold water so that it penetrates into the actual root zone as we're doing establishment watering the first 6 to 12 months. So now we just mulch back around where we disturbed the soil to suppress weed seed germination. Typically you want to leave a couple inches around the base of the plant so that there's not a microclimate of humidity that's breeding fungus and different pathogens that can then attack the plant base. I'm more concerned about weed suppression here, so I'm kind of ignoring my own rule. But there you have it. This is western something aster. And we now have 3 species of asters here in the garden, and this one was just getting ready to bloom, so I figured I'd put it in the ground and let it live its best life. So today I pulled this Jamaican caper out of the ground at my old house. I never did anything with the roots, just plopped it in the ground from the 3-gallon pot it came in. And after rinsing all the dirt off, I mean, look at this tangle here where it's already wrapped around its own roots and choking itself out. I'm going to do a little root surgery on that. I've already done some before I plant it. And here's another good example of, you know, the root curving to deal with the pot and the constrained conditions that I'm going to take off. You know, for instance, you see this one, this root should be going outward, but here it's bent at a 90-degree angle and it's going down instead into the rich potting medium. So again, I'm just going to reach in there and just prune that whole thing off where it makes that 90-degree turn back on itself. Now I've cleaned my cutting instruments in advance so I'm not potentially adding infection to the roots. And also, you know, these roots that make these really hard curves, you know, if you chop them off there, then they resprout from the cut, and if you don't, they just keep growing lengthwise and don't spread properly. So cutting most of those 90-degree turns back towards the center off. And so once I get the roots cleaned off and I start to plant this, I like to use some real high pressure water to get all the air pockets out and ensure that we have nice contact with the soil, which will also help stabilize the plant and ensure it does better at acclimating to its new place. This is a single specimen. You know, I separate them when I bring them home so that I don't have multiple plants growing in the same space. Now, as with most trees, shrubs, and wildflowers, as I just planted these, the first 2 weeks I'm going to water every single day, and I'm going to make sure I water slow so that the water doesn't just rinse off the soil. And I particularly here happen to have hydrophobic soil, especially in that flower bed, that the water just, you know, collects and doesn't penetrate. So I make sure to water a little bit, circle back, water a little bit more, circle back, and do that several times to ensure that the water is penetrating. Out here the water is not, or the soil is not as hydrophobic, and I don't think I'll need to do that, but I will place my hose on the ground at a slow trickle and let that run for about 5 to 15 minutes depending. So the first 2 weeks daily water, second 2 weeks every other day water, and then thereafter for the next remainder of 6 months, which would be 5 months, I water twice a week to establish these. And I continue watering once to twice a week for the first year, because I feel like that's really how long trees take to establish. And these are trees, even though they're small understory trees. Now, Simpson stopper can, as a standard single trunk, which is how I'm growing this one, or trying to anyhow. There were some suckers when I pulled it out of the ground at the previous property, and I removed those and to maintain the standard form. Now this can grow into, I think the record is 30 feet, but they tend to get 10 to 20 feet tall. And like with most native shrubs, woody shrubs and trees, you know, first year they creep, first year they sleep, second year they creep, and third year they leap and start growing. I saw this grow a little bit the first year, so it's a really cool. And now here we are with the finished product. You can see I put down this weed mat here, which will suppress weeds on its own, and I put this protector around the trunk that's made of plastic, because we have a lawn service crew that I have no control over, and they are the bane of native plant people everywhere with their little weed whackers stripping off the bark, which ultimately kills the plant once it gets girdled, or the bark is stripped entirely in a circle around the base of the plant. Then it can't get nutrition back into the root system, which travels through the exterior parts of the bark. As you can see, I put these statues and plants on the south side of them to give them a little bit of shade. I did root wash all of these wildflowers. And anyway, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share. Have a great day. Happy gardening. So, short little update. The Simpson stopper dropped all of its leaves. There's the last one hanging on, but it's brown. So how can I tell if this plant is dead or still alive? So there's a real easy, quick check you can do. You can very simply take your nail or a sharp object. I'm due for a mani-pedi, so I'm just going to use my nail. But you can see here that the cambium, or the inner part of the bark, is still green and very much alive. So that is one real quick test that one can do. So, you know, again, we've got some green. This is still alive. It's potentially going to come back when it's ready. Of course, been watering this incessantly for ages now. And over here you can see the Jamaican caper is just thriving. Like I said, brown thumb plant. Very resilient to transplant, massive root disruption. I mean, if ever there were a candidate for root washing and doing massive disruption, if you watched the video, you saw how much cutting I did on that little bad boy's root system. I mean, I tore it up. But here it is, thriving. And it's already put out some growth. You know, it's a good 6 inches, foot taller in the first year. which is typically unheard of when you just plop plants in the ground and don't do some major root disruption.